Have you ever looked into someone's eyes, and for a moment, the world stopped? Not because you knew that person, not because it made sense, but because something ancient inside you remembered. A feeling with no explanation. A silence that asked for no proof, only presence. They weren't what you were looking for, but maybe they were exactly what your soul was waiting for. Carl Jung said that what feels deeply destined is not fantasy. It's the unconscious calling you home. And when two souls meet before the mind understands, something much greater begins to unfold. What if it wasn't love at first sight, but memory? Not from this life, not from logic, but from the part of you that never forgot who you are. In this video, we'll walk toward that silent place, where time becomes truth, and where connection doesn't scream, but it's impossible to ignore. Stay with me until the end, because the part of you that felt something real is about to understand why. And if you feel drawn to this depth, to the language of the soul, and the forgotten secrets of Jung, subscribe. This video isn't just content, it's a mirror. And maybe it's yours. Something ancient in you remembered. You didn't know the name, you didn't know the story, but it felt like something inside you paused to listen. It was just a look, just a presence, just a moment. But in that moment, time lost its urgency. Maybe it happened in an ordinary place, on an ordinary day, but what you felt was anything but ordinary. It was like something dormant inside you awakened without warning, and you didn't know if it was longing, peace, or confusion. You just knew it was real. On the outside, everything looked the same, but inside, something ancient in you remembered. Not the past, not another life, but what you are when you're not trying to be anything. And for a moment, no words were needed. The heart understood before the mind. It was like recognizing someone you'd never seen, but who had lived in your silence for a long time. You tried to rationalize it. Was it just attraction? Was it loneliness? But no explanation made sense, because it wasn't logic. It was soul, language. And then came the fear. Because when something true touches us without warning, the first thing we do is doubt. You wondered if you were imagining it, if you were projecting, if you were being foolish. But what if it wasn't an illusion? What if it was your soul trying to speak, and you had never stopped to listen? Do we recognize the other, or do we recognize forgotten parts of ourselves? Maybe the name for this isn't love. Not yet. Maybe it's memory, not of what was, but of what was always waiting to be. And what if everything you felt in that first instant wasn't the beginning of a romance, but the beginning of a reunion with yourself? In the next chapter, we'll walk through this question. We'll step into the space where love doesn't look like the stories we've been told, where the heart doesn't race, but falls silent, and where the soul, instead of getting lost, finally remembers. Because maybe it wasn't love, it was memory. It wasn't love. It was memory. You called it love because it was too strong to be anything else. But deep down, you knew it was different. It wasn't the kind of love that comes with promises. There were no pretty words, no declarations, no certainties. There was a heavy silence, almost sacred, a peace that hurt, a full emptiness, and no matter how hard you tried to explain it, no one seemed to understand. Because how do you explain that someone you just met seemed to know things about you that even you didn't know? Maybe you tried to run, made excuses not to feel so much. But the more you ran, the more that face returned in your mind. It wasn't the body. It wasn't the conversation. It was something invisible, ancient, magnetic. Carl Jung would say it wasn't love in the ordinary sense. It was the unconscious remembering itself through the presence of another. It was your story hidden behind someone else's face. It was your shadow wanting to be seen. It was your soul asking for attention. You recognized it by accident. Because the body remembers. The skin remembers. The soul remembers. Even when the mind tries to deny it. And if you felt all of that without understanding it, it's because it wasn't something your mind created. It was your unconscious responding. An echo of what had been kept hidden for so long. Maybe that encounter wasn't meant to be lived, but to be remembered. Remembered by you. By parts of yourself that had faded. By dreams you locked away. By wounds that never had a name. It wasn't love. It was the memory of a calling. It was you seeing yourself in a new way, for the very first time. It was your heart whispering, "There's something of yours there," even if you don't know what. And now? Now the silence returns. But it carries questions that won't disappear. Why do certain people appear exactly when we're in pieces? Why do we feel so much for someone who never promised us anything? What if all of this is more than coincidence? In the next chapter, we'll cross the veil between the outer and the inner. We'll step into the world where the universe doesn't act by accident, but as a mirror, a symbolic mirror, precise, sometimes cruel, that responds to what you feel, even if you never said it out loud. Because what you experienced, maybe it wasn't luck, it was synchronicity. When the outer world responds to your inner silence. You thought you were alone in that feeling. Just another emotion tucked between the routines of the day. But then something happened. And it wasn't grand. It was small, but far too precise to be mere coincidence. Maybe it was a song that played at the exact moment. A sentence in a forgotten book on your shelf. A dream with the face you swore you had forgotten. Or that unexpected encounter in the place you almost didn't go. And in that moment, you felt the universe heard you, as if the outside had listened to what you never said, as if the invisible was responding with signs. Carl Jung would call this synchronicity, but not as a magical event, as a mirror, a meeting between what you feel and what the world reflects back. You think of someone and they appear. You hold a question, and the answer comes from a stranger's mouth. You ask in silence, and life replies without a word. This isn't chance. It's the unconscious in motion. It's the soul dancing with time. It's the outer world reflecting what's ready to emerge. Synchronicity doesn't scream. It whispers. It comes wrapped in details, in nearly invisible moments. But when you listen, you know. You know it matters. You know it's not random. You know that life, even in silence, holds an intelligence beyond logic. And that's frightening. Because if life responds, then maybe everything we feel has more power than we realize. And if the world out there starts to mirror what we carry within, what does that say about what you've been feeding in silence? What if what attracts you so deeply in someone is just an answer to a part of yourself begging to be heard? In the next chapter, we'll dive into that mystery. Because maybe the other isn't just the other. Maybe what you see, what you crave, what you love is actually what you've forgotten to recognize in yourself. What repeats out there may just be the projection of what's still pulsing inside. And what if what you call connection is really a mirror? You don't fall for them. You fall into yourself. You thought it was about them. The smile, the voice, the gaze that saw straight through you. But over time, something became clear. You weren't falling in love with that person. You were finding yourself through them. It wasn't just connection. It was a mirror, a reflection that revealed parts of you that had been asleep. Jung said there's a hidden image inside each of us. In men, the forgotten feminine soul. In women, the silenced masculine spirit. He called it anima and animus, but this isn't theory, it's experience. It's the reason you feel drawn, without logic, to someone who awakens something you didn't know existed. You saw in him the comfort you never allowed yourself, the freedom you learned to fear, the strength you forgot to claim, the sweetness you hid to stay safe. And the craziest part is, you felt all of that even if they said nothing, because it's not about what they do. It's about what they activate. And what if what you loved most in them was actually what your soul has been begging you to reclaim? You were enchanted because, for a moment, you felt something come alive in you. A spark, a presence, a wholeness. It wasn't him. It was you, being touched by a forgotten part of yourself. That's why it felt so real, so powerful, so inevitable. Because it wasn't about the person. It was about the revelation. You didn't fall in love with a body. You fell in love with the memory of something in you that had been lost. And when he left, if he left, he didn't just take longing with him. He took a piece of you that you're still trying to bring home. You try to move on, but you don't just miss him. You miss the woman you were when you were with him. The version of yourself that came alive in his presence. The courage you felt. The tenderness you accessed. The fire, the stillness, the faith. He was the access, but not the destination. In the next chapter, we'll talk about that. About those people who come like keys, who open doors, but never step inside, because not every encounter is meant to stay. Some come only to remind you of who you were before you forgot. They awakened what was asleep. You were doing fine, or at least pretending you were, your pains neatly tucked into drawers, your dreams boxed up in pretty containers, the parts of you that cried, silenced in a hurry, until this person arrived, and without even realizing it, took you back to places you hadn't visited in years. It was as if someone turned on the lights in a room you had locked yourself. And there were the fears, the emptiness, the unspoken desires, the courage you forgot you had. You didn't understand it right away. You thought it was passion. You thought it was neediness. You thought it was all in your head. But it wasn't. It was your soul saying, "Now, it's time to remember." Carl Jung said the soul longs for wholeness, and to reach it, sometimes it sends people who break us with purpose, not out of cruelty, but because without that breaking, we don't wake up. And that was it. This person you didn't expect touched parts of you you couldn't name. They made you feel again, dream again, hurt again. You felt alive, but also vulnerable. Because when what was asleep awakens, life loses its anesthesia, and the heart, once numb, begins to beat with force. It's intense, it's frightening, it's real, and even if it didn't last long, even if it hurt more than you'd like, you are no longer the same. The woman you were before him didn't return, and maybe that's the hidden gift of this story, because he didn't come to give you a happy ending. He came to show you where you had stopped living. He awakened your hunger, your fire, your light, your voice. He wasn't the destination, but he was the starting point. And now that all of this has awakened in you, what will you do with it? In the next chapter, we'll step into this full emptiness, this silence that remains when the other leaves, but everything they awakened stays inside, because the pain of absence is sometimes just the echo of what you found again, and still don't know how to hold alone. The peace that asks for no proof. There were no promises, no declarations of love, but there was something far more rare. There was peace, and not the kind of peace that comes from comfort. It was the peace of not needing to defend yourself for the first time. In his presence, you didn't have to perform. You didn't have to justify your silence. You didn't have to hide your fragilities. You didn't have to cover your wounds with a strength that wasn't yours. You simply existed, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. It's not common. This kind of presence that doesn't demand, doesn't judge, doesn't invade. This kind of silence that embraces without asking anything. This kind of invisible touch that says, "You are safe." Maybe that's why it hurt so much when he left. Not because he was perfect, but because with him, you accessed a place within you that you thought was lost. It wasn't about what he said. It was how he looked at you, as if he saw in you something you had forgotten, as if he were saying, "You don't have to prove anything. I've seen you. And still, I choose to stay for a while." That kind of connection is rare, and maybe that's why it feels unreal. The mind tries to fit it into familiar patterns, but the soul knows. It feels, it remembers, and that's where the conflict begins. Because when something true appears, the mind panics. It wants explanations, guarantees, labels, endings. But this peace, it cannot be explained. It doesn't need proof. It just is. You might go years without feeling it again. And maybe you will, because this kind of encounter doesn't come when you want. It comes when you're ready. And even if it lasts only a moment, it changes everything. Because once you've felt that kind of peace, you can no longer settle for the noise you once called love. In the next chapter, we'll talk about these encounters that feel eternal, but don't remain. These presences that transform and then vanish, as if they came only to remind you of what you should never have forgotten. They came to remind you not to stay. You didn't understand why. It ended because everything inside you told you there was something there, something real, something bigger than fear, bigger than the circumstances, bigger than what you had words for. And yet, he left. Maybe without explanation. Maybe with reasons that didn't soothe a thing. Maybe leaving more questions than answers. And you tried to accept it. Tried to move on. But his absence echoed in places no one else could reach. It wasn't ordinary longing. It was the sense that a piece of you had gone with him. But what if this pain isn't the end of the story? What if he didn't come to stay? Because that was never his purpose in your life. Carl Jung said that some people cross our path, not to remain, but to stir something inside, to awaken, to break what was stuck, to ignite what had gone dim. And when the soul finishes that process, they leave. Like a dream too powerful to last the whole night. Like a song that plays only once but never leaves your memory. He didn't leave because it was a lie. He left because his role was complete. He came as a mirror and left as a portal. You wanted continuity, but he was a beginning. You wanted answers, but he was a question. You wanted permanence, but he was movement. And the truth is, some presences prepare us to return to ourselves. After him, you started looking at yourself more deeply, listening to yourself more gently, questioning yourself more honestly. He reminded you of who you were when no one was watching. And that doesn't get lost. Even if you never see each other again. Even if your paths never cross again. Even if he never understands what he caused. You know. And that's enough. In the next chapter, we'll dive into this silent territory. What remains when the other is gone. Because maybe the most important thing is not who left, but who stayed within you. After they passed through, what remains when the person leaves, he left. But something stayed. It stayed in your body. In the memory that repeats when you close your eyes. In the way your breath changed ever since. It wasn't just the emptiness of absence. It was a new presence inside you. An echo, a residue, a calling. You feel it when you walk. When you hear songs that once meant nothing. When you see others trying to reach you. But no one arrives at the same place. But is it because of him? Or because of what you accessed through him? Because he left. But what he awakened in you still pulses. The courage that returned. the tenderness that emerged, the hunger for life that had been forgotten. Carl Jung said that true encounters aren't defined by duration, but by the transformation they provoke. And you were transformed, not in the way you wanted, but in the way you needed. You are no longer the woman who lived on autopilot, no longer the one who accepted emotional crumbs or called love something that only filled space. You touched something within you, and once touched, there's no going back. And that's where the hidden gift of absence lies. It brings you back to yourself, not all at once, but in pieces, in silences, in nights that last too long and answers that never come. The pain doesn't vanish, but it changes place. It stops being about him and starts being about everything you now have to learn to hold on your own. You no longer need someone to say, "Stay," because now, maybe for the first time, you are the one who stays with yourself. And that is revolution. In the next chapter, we'll talk about this mysterious readiness. This moment when everything seemed wrong, but your soul already knew it was time. Because there are times when the heart hesitates, but the unconscious has already opened the door. And that's when everything begins to happen. You were already ready, even if you didn't know. You said you didn't want it, that it wasn't the right time, that you were focused on other things. But life had other plans, because no matter how much your mind resisted, your soul was already calling. That's how real things arrive. They don't come when you ask. They come when you're ready, even if you don't know it yet. And maybe, on that ordinary day, when you met that gaze, you were still broken inside. Tired, skeptical, closed, but a part of you was open. Open enough to recognize. Open enough to allow feeling. Open enough to begin, even without understanding what was beginning. Carl Jung said that the unconscious prepares the ground before the conscious mind takes action. And that's why everything can seem confusing at first. You think you're not ready, but something deeper is already in motion. You start dreaming differently, feeling restless for no reason, getting emotional over things you used to ignore. All of it is a sign that the calling has already begun, even if you're still pretending you haven't heard it, because the soul doesn't follow deadlines. It breaks through when it must. It moves when it's time. And the right time isn't always comfortable. You were already ready. Ready to feel. Ready to dive. Ready to find yourself in someone and then learn not to lose yourself again. You just didn't know. And that's okay. The soul usually knows. First, in the next chapter, we'll talk about that kind of love that doesn't come to complete, but to reveal. The love that doesn't save you, but reminds you of who you are when you stop running. Because maybe what you were looking for was never someone else, but yourself returned. The love that awakens, not the one that fills. You spent your life waiting for someone to complete you. Someone who would be shelter, certainty, destiny. But what arrived was different. It wasn't calm. It was an internal storm. It wasn't stability. It was impulse. It wasn't the happy ending you imagined. It was the turbulent beginning of a return to yourself. Because he didn't come to fill you. He came to wake you up. And that's what he did. He looked at you in a way no one else did. He said things that echoed for days. He touched layers you didn't even know existed. You felt it. And you felt it deeply. Because when something inside you has been asleep for too long, waking up hurts. Carl Jung said that true love is not the one that protects us from pain, but the one that pushes us toward truth. And the truth is, you didn't need someone to complete you. You needed someone to reveal what you forgot to be. And that's what he did. He reminded you of your intensity, your sensitivity, your courage, your fear, your light, your shadow. He didn't give you stability. He gave you a mirror. And you saw. You saw what needed to be integrated. You saw what you were denying. You saw where you were still hiding. Was it love? Maybe, but not the romantic love from the movies. It was symbolic love, the kind that doesn't soothe, but rips you open. And even if he didn't stay, even if it didn't work in the outside world, he left one thing inside you: the memory of who you are, when someone truly sees you. In the next chapter, we'll step through that mirror, because what you saw in him may have never been about him. Maybe it was about you. And what if everything that enchanted you was just your own light, trying to return? They weren't them. They were you. In another format first, it seemed like it was all about him. The way he spoke, the way he looked at you, the impact he had just by entering a room. It was as if he carried something you'd always searched for and never found anywhere. But with time and with the silence that followed, you started to see? It wasn't him. It was what he activated. It was what he reminded you of. It was what he represented. Carl Jung would say you didn't fall for a person. You fell for the part of you he made breathe again. The sweetness you hid. The courage you suppressed. The gaze you stopped offering yourself. He embodied that. And that's why he pierced you. It was you, projected, dressed as another. He was the living image of what your soul needed to find. And when he arrived, you saw it. You saw the light. You saw the strength. You saw the vulnerability. And you thought, it's him. But maybe it was you, your essence, your light, your inner masculine, your repressed power. What was wounded, but not broken. What was silent, but not dead. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's sacred, because the soul will use whatever it must to bring you back to yourself. And sometimes it uses someone who shakes you, who stirs you, who unravels you, so that you finally see what you forgot to recognize in yourself. You didn't fall for him. You fell into yourself. And now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Now that you've touched it, you can't pretend you don't feel it. In the next chapter, we'll enter the silence that comes after all of this, when it all sinks in, when the other leaves, and only you remain, with everything that was awakened. Because maybe the truest kind of love is the one that begins when the other walks away, and you finally stay. The truth lives in the silence that followed. He left, and on the outside, everything went back to normal. But inside, it never did. A silence remained, heavy, mysterious, almost alive. Not the kind of silence that suffocates, but the kind that exposes, the kind that whispers truths you avoided for too long. At first, you tried to run, to distract yourself, to rationalize. You tried to forget, erase, move on. But there was something there still, insistent, deep. It was like his echo still moved through the house. But slowly you realized it wasn't him. It was you. It was everything that had been awakened, now needing space to exist without external support. Carl Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are transformed." And that's what happened. You were transformed. And now, in the silence, the truth begins. The truth of who you are when you're not trying to please. Of who you are when no one is watching. Of who you are when you stop chasing those who never stayed and start staying with the one who matters most. You. This silence is not absence. It is fertile ground. It is a beginning. It is a portal. Because after all you've felt, after all you've seen, you no longer fit inside the old version of yourself. You don't need to be chosen anymore, because now you know what it means to choose yourself. You no longer need someone to tell you who you are, because now you recognize yourself. You no longer need to fill the emptiness with someone else's promises, Because you've learned to sit in the emptiness and listen to your own soul. And that changes everything. Because a woman who listens to herself never again accepts being silenced. A woman who sees herself doesn't get lost for crumbs. A woman who has been touched by a love that awakened her never settles for the shallow. In the end, he was just the trigger. But you are the whole journey. And if you made it this far, it's because this story is yours too. In some form, in some place, with some name that still hurts. But the healing is also yours. The return, the rewriting. Now breathe, feel. Allow the silence to complete what the words only opened. And if this video touched something in you, don't leave in silence. Leave a comment. Who reminded you of yourself and then left? The story may have ended, but the awakening is just beginning. If this stirred something in you, breathe. You are not alone. There is a place inside you that always knew, even when the world said otherwise. Even when he walked away. If you made it this far, it's because something in you is waking up. And this channel exists for that. To be shelter, mirror, passage. A space where your soul can breathe without asking permission. Subscribe, not just to follow more content, but to remember, with each video, who you're becoming. And if you want to seal this moment, write in the comments, "This is where my new story begins." Because it truly does. Not when someone else stays, but when you decide to stay with you. And if this resonated, the next video will take you even deeper. I'll see you there. With all that you are, even what you don't know yet.